Hi, it's Rachel Gans. I'm here to give a PD today on building vocabulary knowledge. So this is really important because when we look and see our data from our last CAs, we see that vocabulary knowledge is an area where our campus as a whole is struggling. This is an area where especially our English language learners, our ELLs, are having some difficulties. Now, this is extra important on our campus because we know about 75% of our population consists of English language learners. So this PD is hopefully going to help our campus as a whole, but especially those English language learners. Because if we're having difficulties understanding the vocabulary in a text, then we're going to have a really difficult time comprehending it. In front of you should be a note catcher. On the back page, you'll see it's completely blank and it says space for personal notes. So feel free to, throughout this PD, write down anything that's standing out to you in that personal space. But right now we're actually going to start in our first section with an activity. So in a second, I'm going to pull up a screen and it's going to have some words on it for you. There are going to be 4 words, and what you're going to do is independently, you're going to decide if this is a text and I have these 4 words in it, which one would I pick to be my vocabulary word that I would teach to my kids? So these are your 4 words. I want you to pause me for the next 20 seconds and independently write that word in your note catcher. Okay, great. Now I want you to again pause me for the next 30 seconds and discuss with the people at your table why you picked that word. Pause me. Okay, great. So we're going to come back to this section in a second. We're going to continue on in the section of your note catcher with one more activity. So now you're going to pick words from a passage. So you have a passage in front of you, and what I want you to do is I want you to pick the words from this passage that you would teach. So instead of it being in isolation, it's the passage as a whole. So this time I want you to take the next 60 to 90 seconds, whatever works best for you, pause me, and again, independently write down those words on your note catcher. So pause me now. Okay, great. I should be unpaused. We're not going to discuss these words a whole lot right now, but we are going to come back to them in a little bit. Okay, so now we're going to talk about picking vocabulary words. This is an incredibly important piece. If we're not picking the right vocabulary words, then it's going to be really hard for our students to understand what words they need to know to comprehend a text. So when we pick words, we want to think about tiers. So there are 3 tiers of vocabulary. The first tier is everyday words, school, book, things the kids seem to hear a lot of. Tier 2 are more academic vocabulary words, surrounds, evaluates. And then tier 3 are content-specific words like foreshadow or dividend. Now, when we're thinking about picking words, we're going to focus here on tier 2, this academic vocabulary section. Our students need these words the most because if they're not comprehending these words, they're not going to be able to get to tier 3. So this is where we're going to be focusing, is on tier 2 words. So again, I want you to come back here. We have our 4 words. I want you to set a timer for 30 seconds, spend about 15 maybe picking out your word, and then about 15 seconds picking out why you've picked that word now. So you can pause me. Okay, great. I should be unpaused. Now your word might be different now that we have an understanding of needing to use those tier 2 vocabulary words. So I want you guys to you've thought about why, and I want you to now pause me again and take the next 30 seconds to discuss at your table why you picked your word or why your word might have stayed the same or changed. So pause me now. Okay, great. I can be unpaused. So next, we're going to look at these questions to consider. Now this is on your note catcher, and the directions say to highlight or to circle whichever of these. I want you to pick 3 of these questions that are really going to help you. So I've tried to include quite a few because I think some of us might want to use some different words. So these are questions to consider when you're reading through passages and you're trying to think about what words you should pick. So how useful is the word? Will the students need the word in order to understand the text? Will they see this word again? How does this word relate to other words the students have been learning? Could this word add dimension to ideas that have been developed? What does the word bring to the text? And what role does the word play in communicating the meaning of the text? So just take the next couple seconds to yourself and circle or highlight which of these words or which of these questions are most helpful to you. You can keep these notes with you. I personally have 3 written on a sticky note that I use when I am looking through different texts so that I can remember and go back which of these questions are best going to help me pick those tier 2 vocabulary words. So by now you should have those highlighted or circled. Remember, there's something really helpful for us to refer back to. Okay, so now we're going to look at ways to teach vocabulary. One of the really important pieces I want us to start with is definitions. So students should be making their definitions in their own words. This is something we're really struggling with as a campus. Dictionaries should be a last resort and not the first time a kid is seeing the definition of a word, which is a lot of times what we've been doing. And a lot of definitions in dictionaries are really stiff and include more vocabulary words that the kids don't know what the definition means because they don't know the vocabulary words within the definition. So we can always walk through them and model coming up with definitions for words. So I would say, because we're starting to roll out this new way of teaching vocabulary, that maybe we do some explicit instruction and do some I do, we do, you do, and walking the kids through how they should come up with their definition in their own words. And of course, you're also always there to help assist the kids if they're struggling to come up with a definition in their own words. Okay, so repeated exposure is an incredibly important piece of vocabulary instruction. Research shows that repeated exposure to words is incredibly beneficial for students. So you should try to incorporate all modalities into vocabulary instruction. So this includes listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Now, most of the time the kids read the word, and that's the first time they see it. And then we've been having them do things like Frayer models where they are writing, but it's the listening and speaking that's an area in which we're struggling with. So you guys talked through which word you thought was the best out of ukulele, avoids, divisor, and computer. And the word that makes the most sense for us to pick, which maybe you talked about or maybe you didn't, is probably not going to be ukulele. It's not going to be divisor. That's one of those tier 3 words. And computer's a word most of them know. Avoids is really important. A lot of time verbs are those really important words that we need to know. So if avoids is one of our vocabulary words for the week, then maybe when we're in the hallway, I can say something like, oh, I see Peter, and I see that he avoids Sally as she's walking through the halls, almost running into him. That way they're hearing the word. Or I can ask questions like, what is something that you have avoided or she avoids? Who here has ever avoided doing some of their homework? So examples like that has the kids hearing the words again, and you can start having them, like we normally do, repeat sentences back. I've avoided homework when I, and that way they're also speaking it. So repeated exposure to words is incredibly important. So now we're going to look at some examples of some different graphic organizers you can use to help students besides a Frayer model, which tends to be what we do every week. This mixes it up and gets the kids using vocabulary in a different way. So this is word gradient. So we see a blank one here. You also have blank examples on your note catcher, and I will email you a copy of your note catcher so that you can have some of these blank forms as well. So we also see one up here filled out. We see them go from crawl to sprint. Now within there is probably going to be their vocabulary word for the week. Maybe it's prance, and we see it here between crawl and walk, which is in the middle. So I've done this with students in the past where we've gone from ugly to beautiful, and somewhere in there is one of our vocabulary words from the week. It gets them connecting this word to a bunch of other words. Another example is concept maps. So the word could come here in the middle. Again, in their own words, here's the definition of what it is, some examples they can think of, and what it's like. Now, This is something we can use in any subject, much like these word gradients are something we can use in any subject. This is not only something to be used in our reading writing block. This can easily be applied to different things they're learning in science or math, social studies, and things like that. So when we're using those questions and coming up with those important words, we can then use these different examples as ways to get the kids to really learn and take in these vocabulary words. Our last one we're going to look at is compare and contrast. Now we've seen a lot of Venn diagrams, which is a really great example. I have a blank one here. Here is a little bit to get them writing a little more. So for this example, their vocabulary word was exhibit, exhibition, exhibited, which we see right here in our sentence. There have been many changes made to zoos. I would rather visit a zoo that has a new or an old gorilla exhibit for 2 reasons. And then they're explaining their 2 reasons and including a concluding sentence. So this is a really great way in writing to get them to include this vocabulary word. This can easily, again, be adapted to math, social studies, science, anywhere where you can include that vocabulary word in the sentence and have them explain it. Okay, so we're going to look back and we're going to try one more time with our words from a passage now that we know a lot more about picking vocabulary words and what it entails. So what I want you to do is I want you to pause me and in partners take anywhere from 60 to 90 seconds to come up with your words and why. So pause me here. Okay, great. So when I went through this, you should have just talked with everybody about, you should have talked with your partners about what words you picked and why. So when I looked through these, I saw dazzled, brilliancy, and glistened were really important words that aren't everyday words, but they're all tier 1, but they're also not those tier 3 super specific content words. If the students didn't know dazzled, brilliancy, and glistened, it would be incredibly hard for them to comprehend this passage, which is what made me pick it. I used those questions, and it helped me answer this. So I want you to take a minute. I want you to go back in your note catcher and you have a section for reflection. It asks, did your words change? Why or why not? What may have changed your mind? What helped you pick different words this time? So pause me and take about 45 seconds on a timer to fill this out. Okay, great. I should be unpaused. Okay, our last thing we're going to do is it's going to be your turn. In this meeting, you are asked to bring your lessons for next week. So you're going to get out your lesson plans and your work and your notes from today's PD. You're going to go through your lessons in your content team and discuss what vocabulary words you want to include in your upcoming lesson plans and what ways you want to teach vocabulary words. Maybe compare and contrast. Maybe it's going to be a gradient. Maybe it's going to be one of those maps. It's up to you guys. Remember to use your questions, use your notes, and to have that help you. Thank you so much for your time. Here are some of the resources I used for this PD. Thank you.